The mist clung to the Columbia River Gorge like a burial shroud on the afternoon of December 7, 1958. It was the kind of cold that didn't just nip at your skin, it seeped into your bones, whispering of winters long past and secrets buried beneath the frozen earth. The evergreens stood like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with frost, bowing under the weight of the gathering storm. Kenneth Martin, a quiet, hard-working man of 42, guided the family's white 1956 Ford sedan along the winding roads of the gorge. Beside him sat his wife, Barbara, her gloved hands folded neatly in her lap. In the back seat, their 3 daughters, Barbara, 14, Virginia, 12, and Susan, 8, chattered softly, their breath fogging the windows as they peered out at the towering cliffs and the churning Columbia River below. It should have been an ordinary Sunday drive. It became one of America's most haunting mysteries. The Martins were last seen alive around 2:30 p.m. at a gas station in the Dalles, Oregon. The attendant, a lanky man named Ed Wilcox, would later recall how Kenneth had paid in cash, his hands steady, his demeanor calm. Barbara had bought the girls some candy, root beer barrels and peppermint sticks, before they piled back into the car and vanished into the gathering gloom. Then nothing. No distress calls. No skid marks. No wreckage. Just silence. When Kenneth didn't show up for work the next day, his colleagues grew uneasy. By Tuesday, the police were involved. Search parties combed the gorge, their flashlights cutting through the mist as they called out names that the wind swallowed whole. The river was dragged. The forests were swept. Nothing. No car. No bodies. No trace. It was as if the earth had opened up and taken them. Then, on February 19, 1959, a fisherman near the Vancouver Bridge spotted something pale bobbing in the water. A child's body. It was Susan Martin, her small frame clad in the same dress she'd worn that Sunday. There were no visible injuries, no signs of violence. Just the river's cruel embrace. 2 months later, Virginia's body surfaced near Rooster Rock, 30 miles downstream. Like her sister, she was eerily intact, her skin waxy and bleached by the water. But there was something off. Both girls had been found fully clothed, their shoes still on. Drowning victims typically lose their footwear in the current. And yet, here they were, as if they had been placed in the water after death. The medical examiner hesitated. These girls didn't drown. Then, how did they die? Theories and whispers. The accident that wasn't. Some said the Martins' car had plunged into the river, swept away by the current. But divers found no wreckage. No glass. No twisted metal. And if the car had gone in, why were only 2 of the 5 bodies recovered? B. The man in the truck. A witness came forward. A trucker who swore he'd seen the Martins' Ford stopped on the old Columbia River Highway that night. A hulking figure in a flannel shirt stood beside it, his face obscured by shadow. When the trucker circled back, both the car and the stranger were gone. See, the cover-up. Rumors spread of police incompetence, or worse, corruption. A deputy admitted evidence had been mishandled. A witness recanted his statement after receiving a visit from men he wouldn't describe. And then there was the other rumor, the one about the local crime syndicate. The one about Kenneth Martin knowing too much. Even now, travelers along the old Columbia River Highway report strange things. A white sedan glimpsed in the rearview mirror, vanishing when they turned to look. The faint sound of children laughing, just beyond the tree line. And some swear that if you stand on the cliffs at dusk, you can hear it, a low, shuddering creak like a car door opening. And then silence. Kenneth, Barbara, and their eldest daughter, Barbara Jr., were never found. No graves. No closure. Just the gorge keeping its secrets. So tonight, as the wind howls through the pines and the river churns black under the moon, ask yourself, what really happened to the Martin family? And more importantly, why does the gorge still whisper their names? Take a deep breath, because this next story is not for the faint of heart. A Christmas nightmare that never ended. Christmas Eve, 1945, a family's last night together. The snow fell softly over Fayetteville, West Virginia, on December 24, 1945. Inside the Sodder family home, the air was thick with the scent of pine and roasting meat. The Christmas tree stood proudly in the corner, its tinsel shimmering in the glow of candlelight. George Sodder, a hard-working coal merchant, laughed as his wife Jenny set the table for their 10 children. The older ones helped hang the last of the decorations while the younger ones, Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5, played on the floor, their faces alight with excitement. It should have been a perfect Christmas Eve. Instead, it was the night 5 of them would vanish without a trace. Just past midnight, a sound jolted Jenny Sodder awake. A thud, like something heavy hitting the roof. Then, smoke. She screamed for George as flames erupted in the hallway, spreading faster than any fire had a right to. The children woke in terror, coughing, stumbling through the thickening blackness. George and Jenny managed to shepherd 4 of them outside, but 5 were still trapped upstairs. George sprinted for the ladder, desperate to reach the second-floor windows. It was gone. His trucks, always reliable, refused to start. The phone line was dead. And as the house collapsed into embers, the Sodders could only watch, helpless, as the fire consumed everything. By dawn, the house was a smoldering ruin. But when the ashes cooled, the investigators made a discovery that turned their blood to ice. There were no bodies, no bones, no teeth, no trace of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, or Betty. The fire marshal insisted the blaze had been hot enough to cremate them completely, but Jenny knew better. She later burned animal bones in a controlled fire. They remained intact. Her children had not been in that house when it burned. So where were they? Theories that defy reason. The kidnapping. A neighbor swore she saw figures carrying bundles into a car that night. Another witness claimed a man stole a block and tackle from the Sodder property hours before the fire. Had someone taken the children? B. The mafia connection. George had been outspoken against Mussolini. Some whispered the fire was retribution, a message from local mobsters. C. The photograph from beyond. Years later, the Sodders received a letter. Inside was a photo of a grown man, his face eerily familiar. Scrawled on the back, Louis Sodder. I love brother Frankie. Illo boys. A 90132 or 35. Was it a hoax? Or proof their son was still alive? For decades, the Sodders kept a billboard on Highway 16, pleading for answers. Motorists would see the faces of the missing children staring back at them, frozen in time. Some claimed to have spotted them, grown, silent, always just out of reach. A waitress swore she served Martha in 1968. A sailor insisted he met Louis in Italy. But no one could prove a thing. If the children died in the fire, where are their bones? If they were taken, who took them? And if they're still out there, why haven't they come home? You might want to check your surroundings before we move on, because this next one is deeply unsettling. Mother's Day, 1938, the last moments of innocence. The sun hung golden over the Allegheny National Forest on May 8, 1938. It was Mother's Day, and the West family had gathered with their church for a picnic among the towering pines. Laughter echoed through the trees as children chased each other through the dappled sunlight. 4-year-old Marjorie West, her fiery red curls bouncing, clutched a handful of wildflowers she had picked for her mother. Her blue eyes sparkled with joy as she skipped between the towering oaks, unaware that in mere minutes she would become one of America's most haunting mysteries. Then she was gone. Vanished. As if the forest itself had swallowed her whole. Marjorie had been playing near the picnic site, just within sight of her older sister, Dorothea. One moment she was there, humming to herself as she plucked buttercups from the grass. The next, silence. Dorothea turned. No Marjorie. No rustling leaves. No distant giggle. Just an empty patch of grass where her little sister had stood seconds before. The search began immediately. Dozens of churchgoers fanned out, calling Marjorie's name. But the forest gave no answer. No footprints. No torn clothing. Not even a single snapped twig to mark her path. It was as if she had never been there at all. By nightfall, hundreds of volunteers combed the woods with lanterns and dogs. But the search dogs whined and circled, confused. There was no scent to follow. Men shouted Marjorie's name into the darkness, only for the wind to throw their voices back at them, mocking. Then the whispers began. Some searchers swore they heard a child's laughter, faint, distant, coming from deep within the trees. Others felt an icy breath on their necks as though something unseen was watching them. The West family stood frozen in horror as the reality set in. Marjorie was not lost. She had been taken. Theories that chill the blood. The stranger in the black car. Witnesses recalled a man lurking near the picnic grounds that day, lean, unshaven, leaning against a black sedan. Had he coaxed Marjorie away with candy? A promise of more flowers? But if so, why didn't she scream? B. The forest that lies. Some locals spoke of older things in the Allegheny woods. Things that had been there long before settlers arrived. Things that hungered. Had Marjorie wandered into a place she wasn't meant to go? C. The letter from beyond. Years later, an envelope arrived at the West home. Inside, a single line in shaky script. I still remember the flowers. I was not supposed to leave. Was it Marjorie's handwriting? Or something pretending to be her? The whispers that never stopped. Even now, hikers in the Allegheny report strange things. A flicker of red hair between the trees. A child's voice calling, "Help me," just before the wind steals it away. And some swear that if you stand very still at dusk, you'll see them, tiny handprints, pressed against the bark of the oldest oaks. As if something is still trying to find its way out. The question that keeps you awake. If Marjorie was kidnapped, why was there no struggle? If she was lost, why no remains? And if something else took her, what is it waiting for next? If you're still with me, get ready, because the next story is even more horrifying. The Shadow Prison. The chilling abduction of Fusako Sano. Niigata Prefecture, Japan. November 1990. The rain fell in silver sheets over the schoolyard, turning the pavement black and slick. 9-year-old Fusako Sano clutched her backpack tighter as she stepped out into the evening gloom. Around her, other children laughed and scattered toward waiting parents, their voices muffled by the downpour. She never saw the man approaching. Not until he was right beside her. "Your mother sent me," he said. His voice was calm, polite, the kind of voice adults used when they wanted you to trust them. But his eyes were wrong. Dark, unblinking. Like a doll's glass eyes, empty of anything human. Before she could react, his hand closed around her wrist. And then, she was gone. No scream. No struggle. Just a child swallowed by the rain. The apartment smelled of stale rice and mildew. Fusako's new world was 4 walls, a stained futon, and a single light bulb that buzzed like an angry insect. The windows were boarded shut. The door, always locked. Her captor, Nobuyuki Sato, was a quiet man. He spoke in whispers as if afraid the walls might hear. No noise. No looking outside. No asking for help. At first, Fusako counted the days. Then the weeks. Then, she stopped counting. Time didn't exist here. Only the dark. And the fear. A child's mind is a fragile thing. Without sunlight, without voices, without time, it begins to fray. Fusako forgot the sound of her mother's laugh. Forgot the taste of her favorite candy. Forgot her own face. Sometimes she pressed her ear to the floor, listening for footsteps in the apartment below. Proof that the world still existed. But all she heard was silence. And Sato's breathing. Always watching. Always waiting. Sato wasn't a demon. He was worse. He was ordinary. A man who ate noodles while reading the paper. A man who hummed off-key pop songs in the shower. A man who kept a child in a cage. His mood shifted like the weather. One day he brought her a stale pastry, almost kind. The next he backhanded her for coughing too loud. "Do you want the police to hear?" he hissed. As if the police were coming. As if anyone was looking. Outside, the world moved on. The Berlin Wall fell. The internet was born. Children Fusako's age grew up, fell in love, had lives. Inside the apartment, nothing changed. Just the same 4 walls. The same silence. The same waiting. 2000, 9 years later. The knock came at dawn. Sato froze, his chopsticks hovering over his breakfast. Then voices. Police. Fusako didn't understand. Not until the door burst open. Not until the light hit her face for the first time in nearly a decade. The officer recoiled. Not at the smell. Not at the filth. but at her eyes. The eyes of a girl who had been erased. Freedom was a kind of horror too. The sun hurt. The noise of traffic was deafening. And her reflection. A stranger. A woman. Not the child she remembered. Doctors said she would recover. They lied. Some wounds don't heal. Some darkness never leaves. The question that haunts. Fusako survived. But how many didn't? How many children are still out there, trapped in shadow? How many monsters are still winning? Sleep well. If you can. Red Circle. This is MR, Night Story. Stay haunted, Red Circle. If you enjoyed these terrifying tales, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps keep the horror coming. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss a chilling story.